Ladies and gentlemen, we are heading into the final week of the regular season for the Lunar Raisins Spikeball League. Today I am joined by Aidan Carson, who is the final commissioner I'm going to be talking to during the course of these power rankings. Aidan?
Hey, how's it going?
So today we're just going to be going over standings, we're going to be going over power rankings for this final week, and then we're going to be harping on two topics that were particularly interesting in terms of developments that happened in this last week. Primarily, one is to do with defense, and the other one is to do with offense and the MVP race. So we'll go ahead and talk about those after the standings and rankings. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the standings. So as you know, two conferences. In the Phoenix Conference, at the top we have the Moisture Farmers. Aidan is of course a member of the Moisture Farmers. They're at an 8-0. They are undefeated on the season, even without Trace in this last week that we played. Second in that division is the Hitmen at 5-3. Then we've got the Defaulty Boys at 4-4, and then we've got COVID Conquerors at 1-7. The Arizona Conference is a lot tighter. There's no clear 1-2 punch here. At the number one slot in the Arizona Conference, we have the Commandos at 5-3. Then we have a tie for second place with the Carrots and Quarantine Kings, both at 4-4 apiece. And then in last place there in that conference, we have the Tropics at 1-7. And it is rather interesting, Aidan, that the last two teams have the exact same record in both conferences.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. And also interesting that the Tropics, their one win is over the COVID Conquerors.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And I think that what we see here, I mean, the way that this league was drafted was entirely random. But, you know, just looking at the records, only two teams seem to not be in that super competitive bubble at current.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah, and I mean, at least one of those teams, that lack of competitiveness isn't even really due to, you know, bad player performance. It's just to do with, I guess, unavailability of...
Just showing up and playing, yeah.
Right, exactly. So it's not even the fact that the players aren't competitive themselves, it's that they haven't been showing up. So,
just showing up has proven to be something that gets you in the game.
Oh, for sure.
And also throughout COVID they had a plan to kind of turn their season around, and things were definitely shaping up, but then they got literally conquered by COVID. So
yeah,
we'll see what happens to them in these last two games.
Yeah, we'll see as we go into the final regular season games here. So let's go ahead and go into our power rankings. It's going to be the same format as we've done for the previous videos, and I apologize for not having videos for the last 2 weeks. Just due to a couple things with my schedule being busy over the last couple weeks, and also with the fact that we've had so many substitutions over the last couple weeks, I didn't really know what to do with the power rankings because, you know, these teams going into the playoffs hopefully will be with their originally drafted teammates without any free agent additions.
Yeah, that is the intention.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and do power rankings this week because I think we only had one team with a substitute this week, so we actually have a pretty good idea as to where these teams are going to be standing. And about that, let's go ahead and get in. So, at my number 1 and 2 slots. At number 1, I have Moisture Farmers 8-0. They have been simply unconquerable so far. They've been really crisp and clean in their play. And at number 2, I have the Hitmen, which is Carson and myself, at 5-3. I feel like when we've got the dynamic going, we have it going pretty much as good as you're going to find it.
Yeah, so my number 1, I don't like putting myself up there, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to ignore an 8-0 record.
Yeah.
So I put the Farmers up there at number 1, and I feel like, I'll be honest, I feel like 2 through 6 could very easily be interchangeable. I feel like that's where the bulk of the competitiveness is right now. I think there's so many teams that could easily slide up to number 2 and fall to number 6, but I have the Hitmen in at that number 2 spot as well.
Oh, yeah. I feel like right now, those are definitely the two top teams in the league just based on performances. But as we get lower into this tier list, you and I actually have a big discrepancy in our placement of first of all, the Defaulty Boys. And that's coming up in 3 and 4. So let's go over 3 and 4. At number 3, I've got the Commandos at 5-3. I really enjoy watching their finesse play. Johnny's really good at setting, and Andrew has this devastating backslash when he goes over the net and just gets it onto the other side. That's pretty hard to counter, and they've been able to execute that to great success so far this season. But going down to my number 4, I have the Defaulty Boys at 4-4. And this is a team that we haven't really seen play super well, but in the last set we played against them this last week, we actually went to 3 games, and they actually ended up beating us, the Hitmen, barely. But it was very competitive. The first game went to overtime. The second game was a stomp for the Hitmen, and then the third game swayed a little bit in favor of the defaulty boys, and they were able to take that game. So I have them at my number 4 slot. Aidan, who do you have at 3 and 4?
Well, so I have at number 3, and this might come as a bit of a shock, but to me, I definitely see it. I have the quarantine king. And I just feel like in terms of who's going to lock in that number 1 seed in this last week, I think the Quarantine Kings have a really good shot at it. They do have a hard game against the Commandos, but they also get the Tropics, and hopefully they should take care of that. I have them there because they are 3-1 in their conference, and they've kind of done so silently. They were 1-1 against the Carrots. They won their 1 game against the Commandos in 3 sets. So I would definitely circle that one for week 5. That will determine a lot. But I think they can definitely get it done. And then, they just handle stuff against teams they're supposed to win. They've beaten them. They beat COVID. They beat the Tropics. They get to play the Tropics again. I think they're right in the mix, and almost all of their games are so close. They haven't really pulled any major upsets. They got kind of close to at least taking a set against the Moisture Farmers this weekend, but they also haven't really been upset that much. Teams that were not supposed to beat them did not beat them.
Right.
So they've kind of been on course. They've been a pretty reliable team. I think this weekend they have a very real shot at possibly going 6-4 and taking the conference.
Well, I agree with you. Looking at their play, they are a very finesse team. They have a great touch on the ball and just their placement. It's not overpowering offense or stellar defense. Just perfect placement of that ball wherever they need it to go. And it's awesome to see.
And I feel like at this point in the game, Holden and Pete definitely know each other's strengths and weaknesses. They've been playing together for so long. They're neighbors. They had experience in other spike ball leagues. I think this is a team that just knows what's going on. But at number 4, and I would say very closely behind, and you could, like I said, 2 through 6, so close. I have the Commandos. They're in the driver's seat right now, and I definitely think they have. They control their own destiny, basically. They win both games, they could take it home. But both the teams that they're playing this weekend, the Carrots and Quarantine Kings, they've not beaten yet. But I think that could easily change this week. All those games have been pretty close. And like you said, Johnny and Andrew's play is it's so smooth and it's so good. I definitely think you should never sleep on the Commandos. I think I would still consider them the favorites to take the Arizona Conference.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I totally agree with you that these slots of 2 to 6 are extraordinarily close and competitive. I have the Quarantine Kings at my number 6 slot, but I and that's not a dig on them. I love their play, and I love watching them play. I think they're an awesome team, but it's just so competitive in this 2 to 6 slot. Any games could go any way with these. So if we move on to the 5 and 6 slot, I have the Carrots at number 5. Going into the start of this league, I had them at my number 1 slot. And Jack has played to my expectation. Jack on that team has scored 111 points. He has broken the triple digits. He's playing his heart and soul out in these games. John, though, has only scored 47 points. And, when you have a dynamic that's so dominant to one player, if you don't play a style that lets that player get it on the net for those points, you end up losing the game.
No, exactly. And I think John's definitely pulling his weight, though. It's just set up to where Jack is the one making most of the big spikes. I've seen them play a lot of their games. And they seem to have their system down. I feel like just at some points they could end up shooting themselves in the foot. They dropped a game to the COVID Conquerors, giving them their only win.
Right.
And that was a glorious day for the Conquerors, but
for sure,
not an ideal day for the Carrots, who have definitely played well, though. Nearly all of their games have gone into set 2 or a close set 2 or set 3. I as well have them at number 5.
Right, yeah. So I put them at number 5. Very competitive team still, just not quite as finessed as the teams above them. And then at my number 6, I have the Quarantine Kings, and we've already kind of discussed them in their play. Very, very good at the placement of the ball. And again, anything between 2 and 6 could be in any given order. Just, whoever's got it working that day is going to win the day, basically. Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so carrots are number 5 for me. Just another interesting stat I thought I'd throw out there is that they easily have the league's best offense with, hold on.
Oh, for sure.
They have 372 points for them, which is outstanding.
Yep.
But at the same time, they have 374 points against.
Yep.
So they're basically allowing the same amount of points they're scoring. They're definitely a good team, but they all their games are so close.
Right.
So and sometimes it's played to their advantage, sometimes it has hurt them.
Oh, for
So
sure.
they're my number 5. They could easily play with anyone. They could easily beat anyone, but they also can be beaten by anyone. So it'll be an interesting team to watch there. I think they'll make that Arizona Conference fun, and they have just as good of a shot as anyone when they get to the Epic Bowl.
Oh, for sure.
Number 6 for me is the Defaulty Boys. And again, they could easily be number 2. They beat the Hitmen this week.
They did, 3 sets.
And when I was looking at the results of that match, one thing I thought was really interesting was the Hitmen actually outscored the Defaulty Boys, but the Defaulty Boys won.
Yes.
It was, if I'm right, I think it was like 60 to 55, but the Defaulty Boys won.
Yep.
And if you can do something like that, that's kind of extraordinary. I mean, get outscored yet still have the points to win. They've been competitive in almost all their games. Just they haven't all fallen their way. I mean, in their conference, they're sitting 2-2. They, if I'm right about that, I think it's 2-2. They
I believe you're right.
Both their losses are to the Moisture Farmers, but they have the Hitmen again this week, and they have COVID. If they beat the Hitmen, they're in very good shape to take that second seed. The only problem is they're basically locked in to play the Hitmen in the postseason right now.
For sure. And I'll tell you exactly what happened in that set there. The point differential there happened in game 2. When game 2 came around for the Hitmen, Carson and I just had this system down where Mitchell was off to my left, and as we know, Mitchell's about half my size. And so every time that Carson would send it to me, I would bear claw it straight to the right side up and over Mitchell's head. And we ended up winning that game by a huge margin. It was something like 21-12 in that second game. And that's where that point differential comes from. And that just shows that these Defaulty Boys are clutch when it comes down to the wire in that game 3 situation.
No, exactly. Once again, it's just another team that can compete with anyone, but also they've had their fair share of hiccups with guys not showing up and stuff like that. But I think as it comes into the playoffs, especially if they take this next game over the Hitmen, they'll end up playing them a third time.
Right.
If they can make that go their way, they'll find themselves in the Final Four and possibly even in the Epic Pool. I mean, I know we got the Moisture Farmers up there, but the more that they win and the more that we win as a player, I feel like the more pressure that we have on our shoulders.
For sure.
And history has not been kind to the heavy favorites, as you might look at I think it was a 2007 Patriots. They won all 16 games.
And they got knocked out first round?
They lose in the final quarter. Like, how did that happen?
Final quarter.
And just recently, the 14-2 Ravens, they choked to the wild card Titans, who just snuck into the playoffs.
Yeah,
so,
I think
once it becomes a win to go home, it's anyone's game.
For sure, and I think it's actually good when you lose, late in the season a little bit.
Yes.
Because then you come in with that humility mindset, like, okay, we're not unstoppable. It reveals those weaknesses before the playoffs, and then you can go ahead and fix those before those big games come around.
Exactly, and the Moisture Farmers haven't had that happen yet, but at the same time, in nearly every game that it gets close, they find a way to clutch up. We haven't lost a set yet, and we've definitely had our backs against the wall. I think of a game against the Defaulty Boys. We were down 2017. We ended up winning 22-20, and then this last weekend we were down. I think it was 20-19. It was match point for the Quarantine Kings, and we ended up topping that 23-21. It's kind of crazy how things are still falling into place, but at the same time, we have not had to come from behind too much. So we'll see what happens when that does happen in the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. No, and the playoffs is what it all comes down to. The regular season record only matters for seeding purposes. After that, when the players come to play, it's down to the wire. It's this one game and nothing else. Everything's out there. And so we'll see how that goes. And it all comes down to this last week that's coming up here. So just addressing the final piece of the power rankings here, the 7-8 slot, I have the Tropics at number 7, and then at number 8 I have the COVID Conquerors. The only reason COVID Conquerors are at 8 instead of 7 for me is because of the situation with their whole plan for coming back falling straight through the cracks. That was their way back into the league, and that really just fell through the cracks, and so I have them down at the number 8 slot.
Yeah, and that's probably true. I had them at 7, Tropics at 8.
Mm-hmm.
I had that. My logic with that was at their best, COVID could definitely beat the Tropics, but obviously, like you said, they're not at their best right now. So,
right.
And both those teams are mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, but now the race is kind of on to see who will end up with that bottom draft pick, and there's even been talks of having the two faced off to see who is officially the toilet bowl winner, mind you.
The toilet bowl winner, yes.
And how it's going to work for the bottom finishing team is that those two teammates, the two original teammates, will get split up, and they will get to choose their player, their teammate for the next season. If the next season gets off the ground, which there definitely have been talks.
Yes, for sure. Now, and looking over at the Lunar Raisin Spike Ball League finances, we have expenditures of 0 and profit of 0, meaning that we can still go for another season financially.
Precisely. We are set up for the long run.
For sure. Yeah, very, very money efficient league we've got going on. Well, Aidan, there are only 2 last things I want to talk about now that we finished those power rankings. Those will be up on screen for everyone to see. The final 2 things. The first thing I want to talk about is the MVP race and the fact that Jack has triple-digit points scored.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. He's no doubt got the system down. He knows what he has to do to score points, and he's doing it, whether it's a low, cheap shot or whether it's a complete over-the-head spike on the USA net.
Yeah.
I would say one thing attributed to his success, though, is Carrot's ability to find themselves in close games. They're going to set 3 in so many of their games.
Yeah,
which
it really helps your point
automatically
average.
Gets him more points, exactly. So that's helping them, but at the same time, I mean, he's definitely just out there running away with it. It's insane. It's
For
so
sure.
fun to watch.
Now, here's an interesting thing, because the MVP race can't be decided by points scored alone, because as we're saying here, a lot of the Carrots games are going to these game 3, whereas a lot of other teams are closing out in 2 games, meaning that they don't have the opportunity to score as many points. So, we've got to look at set wins, who hasn't dropped a set, points scored, things defended, if there are any notes for spectacular plays that have been made throughout the season. It can't just be the points scored alone.
Yeah, that's something that will definitely be considered.
Yeah, it's a lot of factors that need to go into deciding this MVP. You could boil it down to, when it comes down to the line, who you want on your team. It could boil down to who was statistically the best. So there are a lot of factors to consider here. But that being said, Jack does seem to be a favorite for that with those 111 points scored. He is way far ahead of anyone else in that category of points scored. It's not even close. So going on to the second point. Coming into the season, when we saw that Carson and I were drafted together, we're 2 big guys, we are tall, and there was a lot of worry, especially initially, about us being able to get low and prevent those cheap little points from sneaking through.
Very true, very true.
Yeah, and so when we look now, though, at the best defenses in the league, we actually see that the Hitmen are number 2 on that list, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So we as the Hitmen have some of the fewest points scored against us, and while we haven't been scoring as much as the Carrots or other teams, that stellar defense and just the ability to keep it on the net has come back, and we've been able to really thrive with that system.
No, and if our rankings are showing anything, it shows that we're valuing the defense, because I believe on your rankings, you had exactly 1, 2, 3 with defense. The top 3 defenses are the Moisture Farmers are 1, the Hitmen at 2, and I believe the Commandos are the 3rd team.
Right.
So it definitely, winning by a significant margin, allowing few points, has definitely been the recipe for success.
For sure.
Because that means you have a good cushion to close out your games.
Oh yeah, for sure. And so we see that, and we see that it's not just the offenses that win games. The Carrots have a high-powered offense with Jack on there, but you can also win games with stellar defense. And in the Spike Ball League, both sides of that matter. It's a 360 game where you are always on offense and defense consecutively, and sometimes concurrently. So it's one of those things where it all comes together and you mesh it together. So I just wanted to kind of
definitely done that.
Yeah, for sure. Just kind of a brag moment for Carson and I, where we say, look at all of you, look at all the naysayers that said we wouldn't be able to defend against these low balls, and here we are, number 2 defense in the league.
And they have proved it wrong. Yes, indeed.
Yep, so that's just something I wanted to bring up, and seeing these trends set from the beginning of the season to now, whether that's from power rankings, from projected points scored, from playoff ideas, that's just what I wanted to go over. Final thing there with the MVP and the defenses. But yeah, that's all that we've got for you guys today. Thank you so much for tuning into the Lunar Raisins Spike Ball League Network, and we look forward to seeing you guys during the final games of the regular season. And that's it.